They call it the nuclear option in legal circles. It is the moment you press the button and everything your enemies built turns to ash in a single heartbeat. My sister Olivia walked into that courtroom like she owned the building draped in $5,000 of black Chanel morning couture, her hand gripping her husband Brad's arm like a claw. She was so sure she had won. She was absolutely certain that I, the family failure, the invisible daughter, was about to be evicted from my own life. The judge looked at me with pity in his eyes and asked if I had any final words before he signed the emergency order that would strip me of everything. I did not speak. I just checked the time on my wrist. It was exactly 8:59 in the morning, 1 minute until the heavy oak doors would open, 1 minute until the man my grandmother called the gatekeeper would walk in. 1 minute until my family realized that the sweet, quiet grandma they thought they knew was actually a shark in a floral dress. And when that clock struck 9, the screaming started. But to understand why I watched their lives crumble without blinking, you have to go back to the beginning of the end. You have to go back to the night we put Big Mama in the ground. The scent of lilies and expensive perfume was still clinging to my clothes as we walked into the gilded table. It was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where the water costs more than my hourly rate as a forensic accountant. My grandmother Ruby had been in the ground for less than 3 hours, and yet here we were celebrating. That is what it felt like to me. A celebration. My sister Olivia and her husband Brad swept through the dining room like royalty, shaking hands with people at other tables, nodding to the maitre d', acting as if this were a networking event rather than a funeral reception. My parents, Marcus and Beatrice, trailed behind them, beaming with that desperate, hungry pride they always wore when they were around Olivia. I walked behind them all, invisible as always. I was the one who had spent the last 5 years living in Big Mama's drafty old house, changing her sheets, cooking her meals, and reading to her when her eyes grew too tired. But tonight, I was just the extra chair at the table. We were seated in a private alcove under a crystal chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion. I sat at the far end, the spot usually reserved for children or unwanted guests. I watched as Brad picked up the wine list, his eyes scanning the prices, not the vintages. "We need something robust to honor her memory," Brad announced, his voice booming enough to turn heads. He signaled the sommelier and ordered 3 bottles of the Cabernet Sauvignon Reserve, $500 a bottle. Then he ordered the Wagyu beef platter for the table, not because anyone was hungry but because he could. I sat there, my stomach twisting in knots, sipping water. I had not eaten in 2 days, too consumed by the raw, hollow ache of losing the only person who had ever truly loved me. But looking at the feast spread out before us, I felt nauseous. "This is a great turnout," Olivia said, swirling her wine. "Did you see the flowers from the mayor? I told you, Brad, our connections are paying off. People know the Sterling name means something in this city." Brad laughed, a wet, self-satisfied sound. "It is all about positioning, babe. Even a funeral is an opportunity if you know how to work the room." I handed out 5 business cards by the graveside alone. That is 5 potential listings. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. They were talking about selling houses over our grandmother's fresh grave. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to be appalled, waiting for my father to tell Brad to show some respect. Instead, my mother Beatrice nodded enthusiastically. "That is just smart business, Brad," she said, reaching over to pat his hand. "You and Olivia are always thinking ahead. That is why you are so successful. Big Mama would have wanted you to thrive. She would have wanted us to be sad," I whispered. The table went silent. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. "Excuse me," Olivia asked, her perfectly arched eyebrow raising. "I said she would have wanted us to be sad." I repeated, my voice shaking slightly. "She died 3 days ago. We are eating steak and talking about business cards. It feels wrong." Olivia sighed, the long, dramatic sigh of someone forced to deal with a toddler. "Oh, Nia, do not be such a downer. Just because you want to wallow in misery does not mean the rest of us have to stop living. Big Mama lived a long life. It was her time. We are celebrating her legacy." Legacy! Brad scoffed, cutting into a piece of meat that cost more than my car payment. The only legacy that woman left was that falling down house in the district. I am telling you, Marcus, once we bulldoze that shack, the land value alone is going to set us up for life. I have already got developers lined up. We can put 12 luxury condo units on that lot. My heart stopped. Bulldoze. That house was not a shack. It was a museum of our family history. It was where my father grew up. It was where I had lived for 5 years. Every creak in the floorboards, every scratch on the banister had a story. You cannot sell the house, I said, my voice rising. I live there. Not for long, Olivia said breezily, taking a sip of wine. We need to liquidate the assets to settle the estate. You know how it works, Nia. You are an accountant, aren't you? Although forensic accounting is not real. Finance is it? It is just looking for other people's mistakes. Real estate is the only real wealth, Brad added, winking at my father. And we cannot maximize the value with you squatting in the master bedroom. We need to clear it out, stage it, or better yet, level it. Squatting. I felt the blood rush to my face. I was taking care of her. I was the one who drove her to chemo. I was the one who held her hand when she took her last breath while you were on vacation in Cabo. And we appreciate that, Nia, we really do. My mother interjected, her tone smooth and dismissive. But you have had a free ride for 5 years. No rent, no utilities. You have been living off your grandmother's kindness. Now that she is gone, it is time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. It is not fair to your sister to keep tying up the family capital. I looked at my father, Marcus. He had always been the quiet one, the one I thought secretly understood me. But he just swirled his drink and looked away. Your mother is right, Nia, he mumbled. Olivia and Brad have big plans. They have a vision. We need to support the ones who are building a future for this family. The meal dragged on for another hour. I sat in silence listening to them carve up my grandmother's life like it was the roast beef on their plates. They argued over who would get her vintage jewelry. They discussed which auction house would take the antique furniture. They talked about the trips they would take with the money. Not once did they share a memory of her. Not once did they mention her laugh or her peach cobbler or the way she hummed when she gardened. To them, Ruby Washington was just an ATM that had finally dispensed its cash. Then came the bill. The waiter placed the leather folder in the center of the table. It sat there like a landmine. I saw Brad glance at it, then look away. He patted his pockets theatrically. "Oh, shoot," he said, flashing a charming, apologetic smile at the table. "I must have left my wallet in the other jacket. Liv, babe, do you have your card?" Olivia frowned, checking her tiny designer clutch. "I switched bags at the last minute. I do not have my wallet either." "Mom, Dad?" My father looked panic-stricken. He leaned in, whispering loudly. "We are a little liquid light right now, Brad. We were counting on the estate settlement to clear up some things. We thought this was your treat." The tension at the table shifted instantly. The air grew thick and heavy. The waiter was hovering just a few feet away, watching us. This was the family that projected wealth and power, the family that looked down on everyone else. And suddenly they were just a group of grifters playing hot potato with a dinner check. Then 4 pairs of eyes turned to me again. "Nia," Olivia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You have your card, don't you?" I stared at her. "You want me to pay? I just told you I have been living on a caretaker's budget. I do not have this kind of money." "Oh, stop the drama!" Olivia snapped, the sweetness vanishing instantly. "We all know you have been hoarding your salary. You have 0 expenses. You have been living off Big Mama for half a decade. It is the least you can do." I looked at the bill. $4,800. It was more than I had in my checking account. It would max out my emergency credit card. "No," I said. "I did not order the Wagyu. I did not order the wine. I drank tap water. I am not paying for your party." Brad leaned forward, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "Listen to me, you little ingrate. We are letting you stay in that house for a few more days out of the goodness of our hearts. We could kick you to the curb tonight. You are a leech, Nia. That is what you are. A leech sucking the life out of this family. You pay this bill, or we change the locks on that house before you get back tonight. I looked at my parents. Help me, my eyes begged them. Please, just this once, stand up for me. My mother pursed her lips. Just pay it, Nia. Don't embarrass us in front of the staff. Consider it rent. Something inside me broke then. It wasn't a loud break like a glass shattering. It was quiet, like a bone snapping under too much weight. I looked at Olivia smirking in her Chanel. I looked at Brad entitled and cruel. I looked at my parents weak and complicit. I reached into my purse and pulled out my credit card. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. Fine, I said softly. I will pay. Ada girl. Brad grinned, leaning back and picking his teeth. I knew you would do the right thing. I handed the card to the waiter. He looked at me with sympathy, but he ran it anyway. The transaction went through. I signed the receipt, feeling like I was signing away my dignity. Let's go, Olivia said, standing up and smoothing her dress. I am exhausted. Funerals are so draining. They walked out of the restaurant without waiting for me. I watched them go a pack of wolves in designer clothing. I sat there for a moment longer, staring at the empty table, the half-eaten steaks, the stained napkins. They thought they had won. They thought I was weak. They thought that because I paid the bill, I accepted their hierarchy. But they didn't know about the notebooks I had found in the attic. They didn't know about the phone call I had made to a man named Elias Thorne. They didn't know that by forcing me to pay this bill, by calling me a leech, by threatening to bulldoze the only home I had left, they had just started a clock. I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked out into the cool night air. I checked my watch. The game had just begun. That night the sky broke open. Rain hammered against the tin roof of the porch, a relentless drowning downpour that matched the storm inside my chest. I had spent the last 12 hours packing my life into cardboard boxes. It didn't take long. I didn't have much. My clothes, my laptop, a few books. The house was full of treasures, antique quilts, hand-carved furniture, silver candlesticks. But Brad had walked through with a video camera earlier that day, inventorying everything. If I took so much as a teaspoon, he would accuse me of theft. I had one last room to clear, the attic. Olivia and Brad had refused to go up there. They called it the rat's nest. It was dark, dusty, and filled with what they considered garbage. But to me it was the only place that still smelled like her, like lavender sachets and old paper. I pulled down the creaky stairs and climbed up the beam of my flashlight, cutting through the gloom. The air was thick and stale. I wasn't looking for valuables. I just wanted the photo album from her wedding day, the one with the black and white picture of her and Big Papa standing in front of the oak tree Brad wanted to kill. I found the box pushed deep into the eaves, hidden under a stack of water-damaged tax returns from the 80s. I pulled it out, coughing as a cloud of dust rose up. I reached in, feeling for the leather cover of the album. Instead, my fingers brushed against something cold and hard. It was a metal lockbox. I didn't have a key, but I knew Big Mama. She hid keys in plain sight. I felt under the loose floorboard to my left. There it was, taped to the underside of the wood. I unlocked the box. Inside there was no jewelry, no cash, just a stack of bound leather notebooks. They looked like ledgers. I picked the top one up. The leather was cracked with age. I opened it to a random page. The handwriting was unmistakable, Big Mama's neat looping cursive. But the content made no sense. March 14th, 1989. Property acquisition, 4th Street Warehouse. Entity Ruby Holdings, LLC. Purchase price $40,000. I frowned. Big Mama didn't own a warehouse. She was a retired schoolteacher who washed Ziploc bags to reuse them. I flipped to the next book. 1995. Sale of air rights, downtown parcel. Net profit. $1.2 million. Transferred to Vanguard Trust. My breath hitched in my throat. I sat down heavily on the dusty floorboards, the flashlight beam wavering. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days hunting for hidden assets in divorce cases and corporate fraud investigations. I knew how to read a ledger. And what I was holding wasn't just a diary, it was the blueprint of a secret empire. I pulled out more books. There were dozens of them chronicling 50 years of shrewd, aggressive investments. Big Mama hadn't just been comfortable. She had been a tycoon in disguise. She had leveraged her small teacher's pension into real estate during the market crash of the 70s, buying up blighted properties for pennies and holding them until they turned to gold. She had built a fortress of wealth right under the noses of her spendthrift children, hiding it behind a facade of frugality. I grabbed the last notebook, the one dated just 2 months ago. I opened it to the final entry. The vultures are circling. Olivia asked for a loan again to cover her husband's gambling debts. She thinks I don't know. Marcus is eyeing the house, talking about assisted living facilities. They think I am blind. They think I am weak. I have contacted Elias Thorne. The trap is set. Nia is the only one who knows the value of $1 because she is the only one I never gave $1 to. She will find this when the time is right. I closed the book, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it. The rain pounded against the roof, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. A fire had been lit in my belly. I wasn't a squatter. I wasn't a leech. I was the granddaughter of a woman who had played the long game better than anyone I had ever known. I packed the ledgers into my waterproof backpack, wrapping them in my sweaters. I took one last look around the attic, leaving the dust and the cobwebs for Brad. Let him have the house. Let him have the dirt. I had the keys to the kingdom. I climbed down the ladder and walked out the front door, locking it behind me for the last time. I got into my car, the engine sputtering as it turned over. I had nowhere to sleep. My bank account was empty. But as I drove away into the rain heading toward the city, I smiled. I had a name now, Elias Thorne, and tomorrow morning I was going to find him. The scent of damp earth and expensive lilies was still clinging to the hem of my black dress as we walked into the gilded table. It was the kind of restaurant where the air was perfumed with truffles and old money, a place where a glass of water cost more than my hourly rate as a forensic accountant. My grandmother, the woman who had raised us when our parents were too busy chasing their own reflections, had been in the ground for less than 2 hours. The dirt on her grave was still fresh, dark, and unsettled. Yet here we were, my family, and I marching toward the hostess stand, not like mourners, but like conquerors. My sister Olivia led the charge. She swept through the heavy mahogany doors in a black Chanel morning suit that I knew for a fact she had put on a credit card she could not pay off. Her husband Brad walked beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He was a man who wore his arrogance like a second skin, a failed real estate broker who spoke in buzzwords and lived on leverage. Behind them trailed my parents, Marcus and Beatrice, looking around the dining room with hungry, desperate eyes, eager to see who was watching them, eager to be seen. And then there was me, Nia, the invisible daughter. The one who had spent the last 5 years living in Big Mama's drafty Victorian house in the historic district, changing her sheets, blending her food when she could no longer chew, and reading her the Psalms when the pain meds made her anxious. I was the one who knew the sound of her last breath. But tonight, I was just the trailing shadow, the necessary accessory to their performance of grief. The hostess, a woman with a smile as tight as her bun, led us to a private alcove beneath a crystal chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of ice. It was the best table in the house. Of course it was. Brad had probably slipped the maitre d' $100 bill. He did not actually have to secure it. I moved to take a seat near the window, seeking a little distance, but my mother, Beatrice, clicked her tongue. No, Nia, sit at the end. Olivia and Brad need the center seats. They are expecting calls from the estate attorneys. I sank into the chair at the foot of the table, the spot usually reserved for children or unwanted guests. I watched as my family arranged themselves. Olivia smoothed her skirt, checking her reflection in the back of a spoon. Brad loosened his tie, looking around the room as if he were surveying a kingdom he intended to conquer. "We need to do this right," Brad announced, his voice booming loud enough to turn heads 3 tables away. He snapped his fingers for the sommelier. "We are celebrating the life of a titan today. Bring us the wine list, the reserve list." I felt a knot of nausea tighten in my stomach. A titan. They talked about her like she was a corporate merger, not a woman who saved aluminum foil and washed out Ziploc bags to reuse them. Big Mama would have hated this place. She would have looked at the velvet drapes and the gold-rimmed plates and asked how many hungry children could have been fed with the cost of a single napkin. The sommelier arrived, and Brad didn't even look at him. He just pointed at the menu. "We will start with 3 bottles of the Cabernet, the 2015, and bring the Seafood Tower, the Grand Plateau." I did the math in my head instantly. It was an occupational hazard. 3 bottles at $400 a markup. The Seafood Tower was $300. We were at $1,500 before we had even ordered water. "Brad," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "is that necessary? Mom and Dad are on a fixed income. We should keep this modest." Olivia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Nia. Stop being such a bean counter. This isn't about money. It is about respect. Big Mama left a substantial estate. We are just advancing ourselves a little celebration from the inheritance. Besides, you know Brad has that deal closing next week. The commission alone will cover this 10 times over." I looked at Brad. He winked at me, a greasy, patronizing gesture. "That is right, little sister. You have to spend money to project power. That is something you would understand if you ever left that dusty old house and entered the real world." I bit my tongue. The real world. The world where I paid the property taxes on that dusty old house because my parents forgot. The world where I paid the heating bill so Big Mama wouldn't freeze. The world where I balanced books for a living and knew exactly what it looked like when people were drowning in debt but wearing Gucci life jackets. The dinner progressed like a slow-motion car crash. They ordered the Wagyu beef. They ordered the lobster thermidor. They ordered sides of truffle mac and cheese that cost $40 a bowl. They ate with a ravenous, almost violent hunger, as if consuming this expensive food would fill the hollow spaces where their souls were supposed to be. They ignored me completely. They talked over my head, discussing the funeral as if it were a networking event. "Did you see the mayor sent flowers?" Olivia asked, swirling her wine. I made sure to thank his chief of staff. We need to leverage that connection when we list the property. "List the property?" I stopped pushing a piece of lettuce around my plate. "What are you talking about?" My father, Marcus, finally looked at me. His eyes were glassy from the wine. "Now, Nia, let's not get into details tonight. But obviously we cannot keep that house. It is falling apart. The land value, however, is significant. Brad has been running the numbers." "It is a teardown," Nia, Brad said with his mouth full. "Bulldoze the structure, subdivide the lot. We can put up 6 luxury townhomes. We call it the Ruby Estates. Classy. It honors her memory while maximizing the asset." My fork clattered onto my plate. "You want to bulldoze her house? I live there." "That is my home." "It was her home," Olivia corrected me, her voice icy. "You were just the help, Nia. Let's be honest. You stayed there because you didn't want to pay rent in the city. You have been mooching off Big Mama for 5 years." Mooching. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was her caregiver. I was the one who woke up every 2 hours to give her morphine. I was the one who bathed her. "Where were you, Olivia?" "Oh, that is right. You were in Cabo for her 85th birthday. You were too busy building your personal brand to visit her in hospice." My mother reached out and patted my hand, her touch patronizing and cold. "Don't get hysterical, Nia. We appreciate what you did. But you have to admit it was a convenient arrangement for you. You had 0 expenses. You have been able to save your little salary while the rest of us have been navigating the pressures of the real estate market and maintaining our social standing." My little salary. I was a senior forensic accountant. I made good money, but I didn't spend it on leased BMWs and fake eyelashes. I saved it. And I spent it on keeping their mother alive and comfortable when they wouldn't spend a dime. The waiter returned to clear the plates. He asked if we wanted dessert. Bring the dessert menu, Brad commanded. And another bottle. We are toasting to the future. I sat there while they ate gold-flaked chocolate cake and drank cognac. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. They didn't see me. They only saw an obstacle to the liquidity they so desperately needed. I knew why they were here. I knew why they were ordering like kings. It wasn't grief. It was relief. They thought the Bank of Big Mama was finally open for business. Then the check came. It arrived in a black leather folder placed discreetly in the center of the table. It sat there for a long moment, a black hole absorbing the light from the chandelier. The laughter died down. The air grew thick. Brad patted his chest pocket. He frowned. He checked his side pockets. He checked his pants. A performance worthy of an Oscar. "Oh, hell," he muttered, flashing a charming, sheepish grin at the table. "I must have left my wallet in the limo. Liv, honey, do you have your card?" Olivia widened her eyes. "I switched to the clutch tonight, Brad. It barely fits my lipstick. I didn't bring my wallet. I thought you had this." They both turned to my parents. "Dad," Olivia asked, "can you cover it? We will transfer the money to you first thing in the morning." My father, Marcus, turned a shade of gray that matched his suit. He cleared his throat, looking at his wife. "Beatrice." My mother looked down at her lap. I didn't bring my purse. I just have my phone, and I haven't set up the digital wallet yet." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The waiter was hovering a few feet away. His back turned, but his posture alert. He knew. Waiters in places like this always knew when the credit card roulette was rigged. Then 4 heads turned toward me. It was synchronized, like birds on a wire. "Nia," Olivia said. Her voice was different now. The haughty edge was gone, replaced by a sickly sweet demand. "You have your card right." I stared at her. I looked at the folder. I looked at the half-eaten cake and the empty wine bottles. "You want me to pay?" I asked, my voice flat. "Well, someone has to," Brad said, his tone hardening. "We are in a bit of a liquidity pinch until the will is probated. You know how it is." "I don't know how it is," I said. "Because I don't spend money I don't have. That bill is likely $5,000. 4,820 to be exact," Brad said, not even looking at the receipt. "Look, Naya, stop being difficult. You have lived rent-free for 5 years. 5 years of no mortgage, no utilities, no property tax. If you calculate the market rent for that district, you owe this family about $100,000. This dinner, this is a discount. You owe this family." The words echoed in my head. "I owe you." I stood up, my legs shaking. "I owe you for the privilege of watching my grandmother die by inches while you posted inspirational quotes on Instagram. I owe you for the trauma of being the only one holding her hand when she took her last breath." "Sit down," my mother hissed, grabbing my wrist. "You are making a scene. You are a leech." "Nia." Olivia spat, her face twisting into a sneer. "A sad, lonely little leech. You latched onto Big Mama because you have no life of your own. You have no husband, no kids, no legacy. You are just the help. And now the job is over. So pay the bill. Consider it your severance package. Or so help me God. Brad will have the eviction notice on the door before you get home tonight." I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw the fear behind their eyes. They were broke. All of them. The cars, the clothes, the house in the hills, it was all a house of cards. They needed this inheritance not to get ahead but to stay out of jail. They were drowning, and they were trying to stand on my shoulders to keep their heads above water. I looked at the waiter. He had turned around now, watching us with pity. I reached into my purse. My hand moved on its own, robotic and cold. I pulled out my card. It was a simple debit card linked to the savings account I had built over 10 years of working 60-hour weeks. Fine, I said softly. I picked up the leather folder. I didn't even look at the total. I knew Brad's estimate was low. He hadn't accounted for the tax and the mandatory gratuity for a party of 5. It would be closer to 6,000. I handed the card to the waiter. Make it quick, I told him. He nodded and hurried away. See? Brad grinned, leaning back and unbuttoning his jacket. I knew you would be reasonable. It is just money, Nia. You can make more. We are family. Family helps each other out. The waiter returned. I signed the slip. I felt a piece of my soul sear away with the ink. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for them to stand. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, the sound of their relieved laughter following me like a pack of hyenas. They thought they had broken me. They thought that by forcing me to pay, they had reasserted their dominance. But as I stepped out into the cool night air and checked my watch, I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about the metal box I had found in the attic the night before. I was thinking about the name, Elias Thorne. And I was thinking that $5,000 was a cheap price to pay for the absolute moral clarity I now possessed. They wanted a war. They just didn't know I was the one holding the nuclear codes. Tea was not the gentle chirping of the cardinals that usually woke me, but the aggressive grinding roar of a heavy diesel engine. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, the taste of last night's humiliation still bitter in my mouth. I pulled on my robe and rushed to the window that overlooked the front yard. A massive black pickup truck was idling in the driveway, its exhaust spewing gray smoke into the crisp morning air. Behind it, a white van marked with a surveying company's logo was parking on the grass, its tires crushing the edge of the hydrangea bed Big Mama had tended for 40 years. I watched as the driver's door of the truck flew open. Brad stepped out. He looked ridiculous and terrifying all at once, wearing a pristine yellow hard hat and a neon safety vest over his Italian suit. He slammed the door shut and gestured imperiously to the men climbing out of the van, pointing at the house, as if he were a general ordering an airstrike. I ran downstairs, almost tripping over my own feet, and threw open the front door. The morning air was cold, biting at my bare ankles. I marched onto the porch, tightening the belt of my robe like armor. "What do you think you are doing?" I shouted over the noise of the idling truck. "It is 7 in the morning." Brad did not even turn to look at me immediately. He was busy unrolling a large blueprint on the hood of his truck, waiting down the corners with his phone and a travel mug. He said something to one of the surveyors, who nodded and began setting up a tripod near the old oak tree. "Brad!" I yelled again, stepping off the porch. The gravel of the driveway dug into my bare feet, but I was too angry to care. "Get these people off this property." He finally turned. He slid his designer sunglasses down his nose and looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I were a stray cat that had wandered into a business meeting. "Good morning to you too, Nia," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You might want to go inside and get dressed. The demolition crew supervisor will be here in an hour to do the initial walkthrough. We need the site clear." Demolition crew. The words felt like a physical blow. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "You cannot demolish this house. Big Mama hasn't been gone 24 hours. We haven't even met with the estate attorney to read the will." Brad laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "The will is a formality. Beatrice and Marcus have already signed the preliminary consent forms as the primary next of kin. I have been appointed the executor of the estate's development." He tapped the blueprint with a manicured finger. "This land is situated in the most rapidly gentrifying district in the city, the house. It is a rotting pile of lumber and termite food. But the dirt underneath it? That is worth 4 times the value of the structure. We are not selling the house, Nia. We are selling the dirt." He stepped away from the truck and walked toward me, entering my personal space until I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the diesel fumes. He looked up at the house, sneering at the peeling paint on the eaves. "I have developers lined up who are practically drooling over this lot," he continued. We are going to put 12 luxury condo units here. Floor-to-ceiling glass, rooftop gardens, the works. It is going to be a gold mine. And the first step to digging for gold is clearing away the debris. Debris. He called the home where my father grew up debris. He called the place where I had nursed my dying grandmother debris. This is not debris, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so hot it felt like it would sear my throat. This is a home. It is history. You cannot just bulldoze. The attic air was thick with the scent of cedar and old paper, a dry, dusty smell that scratched at the back of my throat. Rain drummed a relentless, violent rhythm against the slate roof just inches above my head, amplifying the isolation of the space. To Olivia and Brad, this room was a landfill of worthless nostalgia, a rat's nest, as Brad had sneered, filled with the detritus of an old woman's life that they couldn't wait to incinerate. To them, value was only found in things that shimmered, or spent things that could be driven or worn. They saw cardboard boxes and moth-eaten quilts. I saw the only history we had left. I clicked on my heavy-duty flashlight, the beam cutting through the swirling dust motes. I had spent the last 4 hours systematically clearing the lower floors, packing my meager belongings, and tagging the few pieces of furniture I hoped to save from the landfill. But the attic was different. This was where Big Mama had spent her Sunday evenings claiming she was organizing her coupons. I moved toward the far corner, navigating a maze of stacked newspapers and old dress forms. My foot caught on a loose floorboard and I stumbled, steadying myself against a stack of banker's boxes labeled Tax Returns 1985 to 1995. Olivia had laughed at these boxes last week, joking that Big Mama was a hoarder who probably saved receipts for gum. I pulled the top box down. It was heavy, far heavier than paper should be. I sat cross-legged on the rough wooden planks, the flashlight propped on my knee, and lifted the lid. It wasn't tax returns, or rather, it wasn't just tax returns. Underneath a layer of yellowed grocery receipts was a thick leather-bound ledger. It looked ancient, the spine cracked and peeling. I pulled it out, feeling a strange vibration in my fingertips, the kind I used to get when I was closing in on discrepancies in a corporate audit. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat looping cursive in blue ink. But the entries weren't recipes or diary thoughts. They were transactions. January 14th, 1982. Acquired. The Donovan Lot. Price $12,000. Entity Emerald City Holdings. March 2nd, 1982. Acquired 4th Street Laundromat. Price $28,000. Entity Sapphire LLC. I frowned, my forensic accountant brain instantly shifting into gear. Emerald City Holdings. Sapphire LLC. I had never heard these names. Big Mama was a retired schoolteacher who lived on a pension and wore the same winter coat for 20 years. She clipped coupons. She scolded me for leaving lights on in empty rooms. I flipped forward 10 years. October 1992. Sold Donovan Lot air rights. Net profit $450,000. Reinvested Vanguard High-Yield Municipal Bond Trust. My breath hitched. $450,000. In 1992. I frantically dug through the rest of the box. There were more ledgers, dozens of them. Black notebooks, composition books, even legal pads, all filled with the meticulous record-keeping of a financial mastermind. I laid them out on the floor, arranging them chronologically. This wasn't hoarding. This was a paper trail. I picked up a ledger from 2005. By now the entries were more sophisticated. Commercial acquisition, downtown lofts. Shell company, Obsidian Properties. Status, leasehold secure. I started doing the math in my head, the numbers cascading like a waterfall. The properties she listed weren't just random lots. They were key parcels in neighborhoods that had gentrified aggressively over the last decade. The warehouse district, the waterfront. If these records were accurate, Big Mama didn't just own this crumbling Victorian house, she owned half the commercial district downtown. But how? Why did she live like a pauper? Why did she let my parents struggle with their mortgage? Why did she let Olivia take out predatory loans for her vanity business? I grabbed a blue folder from the bottom of the box. It was labeled The Tests. I opened it. Inside were carbon copies of letters, some handwritten, some typed. I began to read, and as I did, the image of the sweet, simple grandmother I thought I knew dissolved, replaced by a woman of terrifying intellect and discipline. Letter to Marcus, 1998. Request denied. I will not bail you out of your gambling debt. Work an extra shift. Character is built in the struggle. Letter to Olivia, 2010. Number A. Mercedes is not a necessity. Take the bus. Humility is a lesson you have yet to learn. She hadn't been broke. She had been watching. She had been testing them over and over again, giving them opportunities to prove they valued something other than easy money, and time after time they had failed. I found a separate section in the back of the latest ledger dated just 3 months ago. The handwriting was shakier here, the lines less straight. The cancer had been eating at her strength, but her mind remained razor sharp. Entry May 12th. They are circling like vultures. I can hear them whispering in the kitchen when they think I am asleep. Brad asked about the deed to the house today. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He asked about the zoning laws. Olivia is already spending the life insurance money in her head. Marcus is too weak to stop them. Beatrice is too greedy to care. I wiped a tear from my cheek, my heart aching for her loneliness in those final days. I had been there changing her IVs, but I had been so focused on her physical comfort, I hadn't realized the war she was waging in her mind. Entry May 14th. I have made my decision. I will not let them destroy what I built. I will not let my legacy become a down payment on a yacht for that fool Brad. I have contacted Elias Thorne. The trap is set. They will see a senile old woman. Elias will show them a titan. Elias Thorne. The name was underlined 3 times. I searched the box again. At the very bottom, beneath a stack of old property deeds, was a business card. It was plain cream-colored cardstock with black text. Elias Thorne, attorney at law. Estate planning and asset protection. No email address, just a phone number and a street address in the grittiest part of the city. I sat back on my heels, the magnitude of the discovery washing over me. My family thought they were fighting over a bone. They didn't realize they were standing on a gold mine, and they had just evicted the only person who held the map. The wind howled outside, shaking the window panes, but inside my head everything was silent and clear. My grandmother hadn't left me destitute. She had left me a test. She had left me a weapon. I looked at the no contest clause she had drafted in her own handwriting on a piece of legal pad paper. If any beneficiary challenges the validity of the trust or seeks to remove the appointed trustee, they shall forfeit their entire interest in the estate. Their share shall return to the principal and be distributed to the remaining beneficiaries. She knew them. She knew exactly what they would do. She knew Brad would try to seize control immediately. She knew Olivia would demand the liquid assets to pay off her debts. She knew they would sue. And she had built a trapdoor right under their feet. I packed the ledgers into my waterproof backpack, wrapping them in my sweaters to protect them from the damp. I took the business card and tucked it into my bra close to my heart. I stood up and swept the flashlight beam around the attic one last time. I left the old clothes. I left the dusty lamps. I left the things that looked like trash. I took the truth. I climbed down the ladder, the rungs creaking under my weight. The house felt different now. It wasn't a sad, empty shell. It was a fortress. And I was no longer the squatter. I was the gatekeeper. I walked out the front door into the raging storm. The rain soaked me instantly, plastering my hair to my face, but I didn't care. I wrestled my backpack into the passenger seat of my beat-up Honda Civic and climbed in. The engine sputtered and coughed before roaring to life. I glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. 3 a.m. The demolition crew was coming in 4 hours. My family would be popping champagne at brunch, toasting to their victory. Let them have their morning. Let them have their bulldozers. I put the car in gear and drove away from the only home I had ever known, heading toward the city lights. I had an appointment to make. I didn't know who Elias Thorne was, or if he was even awake, but I was going to camp on his doorstep until he opened the door. The game had changed. And as I merged onto the highway, watching the skyline approach, I finally allowed myself a small, cold smile. Big Mama hadn't just left me money. She had left me the power to burn their world down, and I was going to light the match. The address on the business card led me to a part of the city that the revitalization committees had conveniently forgotten. The GPS on my phone flickered as I navigated through a maze of one-way streets lined with boarded-up storefronts and bodegas protected by iron bars. It was 4 in the morning when I pulled my car to the curb in front of 422 Cedar Street. The building was a squat, 2-story brick structure sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a laundromat that looked like it hadn't seen soap since the 90s. A flickering neon sign in the window read simply, Law, the letter A, buzzing and dying in a rhythmic spasm. I killed the engine and sat in the silence, clutching my backpack to my chest. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, slicking the trash-strewn sidewalk with a greasy sheen. I was exhausted, my eyes gritty and my body aching from the adrenaline crash, but I couldn't sleep. I watched the door of the law office, willing it to open. I waited as the sky turned from black to a bruised purple, then to a sickly gray. At 8 o'clock exactly, an old Buick sedan sputtered up to the curb behind me. It was the kind of car that looked like a boat and sounded like a lawnmower. The driver's door groaned open and a man stepped out. He was not what I expected. Based on the precision of Big Mama's ledgers, I had pictured someone sharp, meticulous, perhaps a little terrifying. This man looked like he had been tumble-dried in his suit. He was short and round, with a shock of wild white hair that stood up in every direction, and a tie that was stained with what looked suspiciously like mustard. He carried a battered leather briefcase in one hand and a thermos in the other. I got out of my car, my backpack slung over one shoulder. He stopped on the sidewalk, squinting at me through thick tortoise-shell glasses. He didn't look surprised. He didn't ask who I was. He just looked at his watch, then back at me. "You are early," he said. His voice was gravelly, like rocks tumbling in a dryer. "Ruby said you were the punctual one." "I am Nia," I said, though I knew it was unnecessary. "I know who you are, child. I have been waiting for you for 10 years. Come on in. It is freezing out here, and the heater takes an hour to kick in." He unlocked the door with a jingle of keys that sounded like a jailer's ring. The office smelled of old paper, stale coffee, and lemon polish. It was chaotic, but oddly cozy. Files were stacked in towers that defied gravity on every flat surface. Behind a massive oak desk that looked like it had survived a war, sat a high-backed leather chair that had seen better decades. Elias Thorne threw his briefcase onto a pile of magazines and gestured to a wooden chair opposite the desk. "Sit. Do you want coffee?" "It is instant, but it is hot." I shook my head. I sat down, hugging the backpack. "Mr. Thorne, I found the ledgers. I know about the properties." He paused in the middle of unscrewing his thermos. He looked at me, his eyes suddenly sharp and clear behind the thick lenses. The grandfatherly demeanor vanished, replaced by a razor-edged intelligence that made me sit up straighter. "You found the metal box," he corrected. "Under the floorboard in the attic." "Yes." "And you read the entry from May 14th. "Yes." "Good. Then we can skip the pleasantries." He sat down and leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "You want to know why a woman worth $40 million lived like a pauper and hired a lawyer who works next to a bail bondsman? 40 million. I had estimated 30. Hearing the number out loud made the room spin. "Yes," I said. "I want to know why she let them treat her like that. Why she let them treat me like that. Because Nia, money does not change people. It unmasks them." Elias picked up a file from the top of a stack. It was labeled simply Ruby. He opened it. Your grandmother was a brilliant woman. She understood markets, she understood value, but most of all, she understood human nature. She knew that if she gave your parents or your sister access to her wealth while she was alive, they would consume it like locusts. They would never learn to build. They would only learn to take. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. So, she created this. The Ruby Washington Irrevocable Trust. Irrevocable, I whispered. My forensic accounting training kicked in. That means it cannot be changed. It cannot be altered by the grantor once signed. Correct, Elias said. She signed this 10 years ago. Every property, every stock portfolio, every shell company was transferred into this trust. Ruby Washington died owning nothing but the clothes on her back and that house. The trust owns everything else. Then why are they talking about selling the land, I asked. Why is Brad measuring the lot for condos? Because they do not know the trust exists, Elias said, a small wolfish smile playing on his lips. And that is exactly how she wanted it. I don't understand. If the trust owns the house, they can't sell it. They don't have the deed. They have the deed to the house, Elias corrected. But the trust holds the lien on the property, a lien valued at $5 million. If they try to sell it, the title search will flag the debt. They won't see a dime of profit. The sale will just pay off the trust. He flipped the page. But that is just the defensive strategy. That is just to stop them from profiting. The offensive strategy. That is where you come in. Me. You are the sole beneficiary, Nia. Not your parents. Not Olivia. You. And you are also the successor trustee, which means you control the assets. You control the flow of money. You control the empire. I felt the blood drain from my face. They will kill me. If they find out I have $40 million, and they have nothing, they will burn everything down. They will sue me until I am dead. Elias leaned back the leather chair, groaning. Exactly. That is the trap. He tapped a specific paragraph on the document. Read this. I leaned forward. It was the same clause I had seen in her handwritten notes, but here it was formalized in dense legal jargon. The no contest clause. In the event that any natural heir or family member initiates legal action to challenge the validity of this trust, or seeks to remove the appointed trustee or petitions the court for emergency control of the estate's assets prior to the formal reading of the will, they shall be immediately and permanently disinherited. Furthermore, any loans, debts, or housing privileges extended to said individuals by any entity owned by the trust shall be immediately called due in full. I looked up at him, my mind racing. Housing privileges. Loans. Elias nodded, seeing the realization dawn on my face. Olivia's house in the suburbs. The trust owns the mortgage company that holds the note. She has not paid in 6 months. We have been letting it slide on Ruby's orders. Brad's business loan. The one he used to start his brokerage, funded by Emerald City Holdings. He is in default. Your parents' car leases, Sapphire LLC. They are all living on her dime, I whispered. They are living inside the trap, and they don't even know it. They think they are successful, Elias said. They think they are independent. But Big Mama has been holding the strings the whole time. She wanted to give them a chance. She hoped that maybe, just maybe, they would show some character. She hoped they would care for her because they loved her, not because they wanted her money. But they didn't, I said. No, they didn't. And they didn't care for you either. Elias closed the file. Here is the situation, Nia. The trust is active. You are the owner. You could walk out of here right now, claim your assets, and kick them all out of their houses by noon. I started to stand up. Let's do it. Let's finish this. Sit down, Elias barked. I sat, startled by the sudden command. If you do that now, they will tie you up in court for years. They will claim you manipulated her. They will claim the signature is forged. They will claim elder abuse. They will drag your name through the mud, and they might even find a sympathetic judge to freeze the assets while it gets sorted out. You will win eventually, but it will cost you millions and years of your life. Then what do we do? We wait, Elias said. We wait for them to pull the trigger. The clause is specific. It triggers when they initiate legal action to seize control. We need them to be the aggressors. We need them to be so greedy, so impatient that they go to court to try and cut you out before the body is even cold. They are already doing that, I said. Brad said he is the executor. He said he is clearing the lot tomorrow. He is lying, Elias said calmly. He hasn't filed anything yet. He is bluffing to scare you off. He wants you gone so he can search the house for cash or deeds. But he will file soon. He has debts to pay. He is desperate. So what do I have to do? You have to let them win. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Let them win. You have to disappear, Elias said. You have to let them kick you out. You have to let them think you are beaten. You have to let them think you are nothing but a homeless, penniless leech. You cannot say a word about the trust. You cannot hint about the money. You have to be the victim. Why, I asked, my voice trembling. Why do I have to endure more? Because when they think you are weak, they will get sloppy, Elias said. When they think you are out of the picture, they will file for an emergency conservatorship or an immediate executor order. They will go to a judge and say that the estate is in danger and they need control now. They will lie under oath. And when they do that, when they file that motion to seize the assets, that is when the trap snaps shut. That is when they lose everything. Not because you took it, but because they tried to take it from you. I looked at the dusty office, at the stacks of files, at the old man who was the architect of my grandmother's vengeance. It was cruel. It was brilliant. It was exactly what she would have done. I have to go back there, I said. I have to let them throw me out. Yes. Elias reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. But you won't be destitute. This is a personal account. It is not linked to the trust. Take this. Get a hotel. Get a new suit. Get a haircut. When you walk into that courtroom next week, I want you to look like a woman who knows something they don't. But until then, you are invisible. I took the checkbook. I stood up. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had spent my whole life trying to be seen by my family, trying to be good enough. Now my power lay in being invisible. 1 week, Elias said. Can you hold out for 1 week? I thought about the spit on the flowers. I thought about the bill at the restaurant. I thought about the way my mother looked at her shoes when I asked for help. I can hold out, I said. Good. Elias smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like Big Mama. Now get out of here. I have a trap to oil. I walked out of the office and back into the gray morning light. The rain had stopped. The city was waking up. I got into my car and drove away from the only ally I had. I was going back to the slaughter. But this time, I wasn't the lamb. I was the bait. The Starlight Motel was the kind of place where you paid by the hour, and the sheets were thin enough to read a newspaper through. I sat cross-legged on the lumpy mattress, the neon sign outside, flickering a rhythmic, seizure-inducing pink across the room. It was a far cry from the Victorian house I had just been evicted from, but it was safe, and most importantly, it was anonymous. I had spent the last 48 hours existing on vending machine coffee and the adrenaline of a woman who knows she is sitting on a nuclear warhead. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim room, illuminating the stack of files Elias Thorne had given me, along with the fresh data I had pulled myself. My family thought I was a failure because I didn't drive a Mercedes or wear red-bottom shoes. They forgot that I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days tracking money through labyrinths of shell companies and offshore accounts for clients who wanted to hide their assets from the IRS or their ex-wives. Finding dirt on a small-time real estate hustler like Brad Sterling was not work. It was a warm-up exercise. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. I pulled up the public records for Sterling and Associates. On the surface, Brad projected the image of a titan. His Instagram was full of ribbon cuttings, champagne toasts, and shiny architectural renderings. But social media is not a balance sheet. I dug into the UCC filings, the court records, and the property liens. It took me less than an hour to find the first crack in the foundation. Brad didn't own his office building. He was 3 months behind on the lease. I dug deeper. I pulled his credit report, bypassing the consumer firewall with professional software that allows us to see the raw data. The screen filled with red ink. Brad wasn't just broke, he was underwater. He was drowning. He had maxed out 5 credit cards to the limit, totaling over $100,000. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I found a judgment against him from a court in Nevada. A gambling debt. He owed the Bellagio $40,000. And then there were the personal loans. Not from banks, but from private lending companies with names like Quick Cash Holdings, the kind of places that charge 300% interest and broke your kneecaps if you missed a payment. I sat back, the realization washing over me like ice water. This wasn't just about greed. This was about survival. Brad wasn't pushing to demolish Big Mama's house because he was ambitious. He was pushing because he was terrified. He needed that land sale to pay off the sharks before they came for him. He was leveraging my family's legacy to save his own skin. And my sister, I pulled up Olivia's business records. Her boutique marketing firm was a ghost town. No new contracts in 6 months. She had taken out a second mortgage on their suburban home, a home I remembered with a dark smile that was actually held by the Trust's mortgage company. They hadn't paid that in 6 months either. They were living on vapors and lies. I looked at the clock. It was 7 in the evening. My parents would be at their condo in the Heights. It was a beautiful place overlooking the river. They loved it because it signaled status. They didn't know that Emerald City Holdings, one of Big Mama's shell companies, held the title. They were living in her charity while spitting on her memory. I had to try. I knew Elias told me to let them destroy themselves. I knew the plan was to wait for the lawsuit. But they were my parents. Marcus and Beatrice Washington were vain, weak, and neglectful, but they were still the people who had raised me. If Brad went down, he would take them with him. He would drain their retirement accounts, leverage their names, and leave them destitute. I couldn't let them walk into the fire without at least showing them the smoke. I printed the documents, the gambling debts, the foreclosure notices, the liens. I put them in a manila envelope. I checked my reflection in the cracked motel mirror. I looked tired. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and I was wearing the same clothes I had left the lawyer's office in. I didn't look like a savior. I looked like a ghost. I drove to the Heights. The doorman at my parents' building sneered at my beat-up Honda, but he let me up. I had the code. I rode the elevator to the penthouse floor, my stomach churning. This was the last off-ramp. This was the last chance for redemption. I knocked on the heavy oak door. It swung open and my mother stood there, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. She was wearing a silk caftan, looking every inch the lady of leisure. When she saw me, her face hardened into a mask of irritation. "Nia, we were just sitting down to dinner. I assume you are here to apologize for the scene you caused at the house." "I am not here to apologize," I said, pushing past her into the foyer. "I am here to save you." She sputtered, following me into the living room. "Save us. From what? Your drama." My father was sitting on the white leather sofa watching the financial news. He looked up, his expression weary. "Nia, please. We have had a long day. Brad has been dealing with the permits all afternoon. He is working himself to the bone for this family. He is working you into a grave, Dad," I said. I threw the envelope onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy slap. "What is this?" Marcus asked, eyeing the envelope warily. "That is the truth," I said. "That is Brad's financial life. He is not a developer, Dad. He is a gambler. He is in debt to casinos in Vegas and loan sharks in Jersey. He owes $500,000 that he does not have." My mother laughed. It was a high tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Don't be ridiculous. Brad is a success. Look at the car he drives. Look at the suits he wears. You are just jealous, Nia. You have always been jealous of Olivia's happiness. Read the papers, Mom, I shouted, my voice cracking. Look at the judgments. He hasn't paid his office rent in 3 months. He is pushing to sell Big Mama's land because he needs the cash to pay off his bookie, not to build condos. If you sign over power of attorney to him, if you let him handle the estate, he will steal everything. He will leave you with nothing. My father reached for the envelope. His hand was shaking. He pulled out the credit reports. He looked at the red numbers. I saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. He saw the truth. He was a businessman, or he had been once. He knew what a lien looked like. Beatrice, he said softly, look at this. This judgment. It is dated last month. $40,000 to the Bellagio. My mother snatched the papers from his hand. She didn't read them. She ripped them in half. She tore them into shreds, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She threw the confetti of evidence at my face. Lies, she screamed. These are forgeries. You typed these up on your little computer because you cannot stand that your sister married a winner. You are sick, Nia. You are sick with envy. Mom, please, I begged, stepping forward. I am a forensic accountant. This is what I do. I am trying to protect you. Brad is going to bankrupt you. Do not say his name, she shrieked. She stepped forward and swung her hand. The slap echoed in the large, empty room. It stung my cheek, hot and sharp. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my face. I stared at her. My mother. The woman who had given me life. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a hatred I had never seen before. Get out, she hissed. Get out of my house. You are a poison. You are a bitter, lonely, ugly little girl who wants to drag everyone down to her level. You are mad that Big Mama left us in charge. You are mad that you have nothing. Well, guess what? You will always have nothing, because nobody loves a leech. I looked at my father. He was staring at the torn papers on the floor. He knew. I saw it in his slump, in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. He knew I was right. But he was too afraid of her, too afraid of the truth to say a word. He was going to let her drive them off the cliff because it was easier than taking the wheel. Dad, I whispered. He turned his back to me. Go, Nia, he said, his voice hollow. Just go. Let us be. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a bridge burning, the structure collapsing into the river below. I touched my cheek. It was throbbing. But strangely, the pain in my heart was gone. It had been cauterized. I realized then that Elias was right. There was no saving them. They didn't want to be saved. They wanted the lie. They loved the lie more than they loved me. They were addicted to the image of success, and they would kill anyone who tried to show them the mirror. I straightened my spine. I smoothed my shirt. I looked at my mother, who was glaring at me with triumphant malice, thinking she had won, thinking she had driven away the enemy. Okay, I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. Okay. I tried. Remember that. When the bank comes to take this condo, when Brad runs off with whatever cash he can steal, remember that I stood here and tried to hand you a life raft. I don't need a raft from you, she spat. I have a yacht. I nodded. I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I walked out of the penthouse, down the hall, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of their expensive, hollow life, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The obligation was gone. The guilt was gone. I walked out to my car. The night air was cool. I got in and started the engine. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. It rang twice. Thorne, the gravelly voice, answered. It is Nia, I said. Are you ready? He asked. He didn't ask how it went. He knew. I am ready, I said. They are filing the emergency petition tomorrow. Brad is desperate. He needs the money by Friday. Good, Elias said. Let them file. Let them stand before the judge and swear that you are incompetent. Let them dig the hole. I checked my watch. It was 9 o'clock. I will see you in court, Elias. I hung up. I drove back to the motel, but the neon sign didn't look cheap anymore. It looked like a finish line. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I wasn't the sister. I was the executioner. and I was going to make sure the blade was sharp. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against the cheap laminate of the motel nightstand. It was a relentless, angry buzz that sounded like a swarm of hornets trapped in a jar. I rolled over and squinted at the screen. My notifications were full. Hundreds of them. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, messages from numbers I did not recognize. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. I sat up, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I unlocked the phone and opened Instagram. There was Olivia. She had posted a video. It was professionally shot, of course, probably by one of her marketing friends. She was sitting in her living room wearing no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that looked artfully distressed. She held a tissue in one hand and was dabbing at dry eyes. The lighting was soft, tragic, perfect. "Hey guys," she began, her voice cracking with performative grief. "I haven't wanted to talk about this because it is a private family matter, but things have gotten out of hand, and I need your support. As you know, we just lost our beloved Big Mama. It has been the hardest week of my life. But what you don't know is that we are dealing with a betrayal that hurts almost as much as the loss itself." She paused, taking a shaky breath. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes wide and pleading. "My sister Nia. We took her in when she had nothing. We let her live in Big Mama's house for years rent-free so she could get back on her feet. We thought she was caring for our grandmother, but we found out yesterday that she has been abusing that trust." My hand started to shake. I tapped the screen to keep watching, unable to look away from the train wreck. When we went to the house to prepare for the memorial, we discovered that Big Mama's jewelry box was empty. Her vintage pearls, the emerald brooch she promised to me on her deathbed, all gone. And when we asked Nia about it, she laughed. She said she deserved it. She said she wouldn't leave the house unless we paid her $50,000. She is holding our family legacy hostage. She is blackmailing her own parents while they are grieving. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. It was a lie, a complete, total fabrication. The jewelry box was in the safe deposit box at the bank, placed there by Big Mama herself 3 years ago when she first got sick. I had the receipt. Olivia continued, a single perfect tear sliding down her cheek. "I don't want to bring the police into this. I don't want to see my sister in jail. I just want her to do the right thing. I just want to grieve in peace. Please, if you know her, if you see her, tell her to come home. Tell her to give back what she stole. We just want closure. Hashtag justice. For Big Mama, hashtag family betrayal, hashtag heartbroken." I scrolled down to the comments. It was a bloodbath. "That is disgusting. How could someone do that to their own grandmother? I know Nia Washington. She works at Henderson Financial. I am tagging her employer. They need to know they have a thief on the payroll. What a leech. Stay strong, Olivia. You are a saint for not calling the cops immediately. Post her picture. Let's make sure she can't show her face in this city again." There were hundreds of them. Vicious, hateful, self-righteous comments from strangers who had no idea who I was, all rallying behind the beautiful grieving sister. My parents had liked the post. Brad had shared it with the caption, "Sad day for the Sterling family. We pray for her redemption." I felt like I was going to throw up. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was a calculated assault on my character. Olivia knew exactly what she was doing. She knew I was a forensic accountant. My entire career was built on integrity. If I was branded a thief, a blackmailer, I would never work again. She wasn't just trying to get the house. She was trying to destroy my future, so I would have no choice but to crawl back to them. I threw the covers off and scrambled to get dressed. I had to go to work. I had to get ahead of this. I put on my best suit, but my hands were trembling so badly I could barely button the blouse. I looked in the mirror. I looked guilty. I looked terrified. I drove to the office in a daze. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. When I walked into the lobby of Henderson Financial, the receptionist, a woman I had eaten lunch with every day for 3 years, looked down at her desk. She didn't say good morning. I walked to the elevator. Two junior associates were whispering near the coffee machine. They stopped abruptly when they saw me. One of them pulled out his phone, probably checking to see if I was the woman from the viral video. I made it to my cubicle. I sat down and turned on my computer. My inbox was full. Not with work emails, but with notifications from HR. Nia, please come to Mr. Henderson's office immediately. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I walked down the long hallway to the corner office. The glass walls felt like a fishbowl. Everyone was watching. Mr. Henderson was sitting behind his desk. He looked uncomfortable. He didn't offer me a seat. Nia, he said, gesturing to his computer screen. We have been receiving phone calls. And emails. A lot of them. I know I said my voice steady despite the pounding in my ears. It is a family dispute, sir. My sister is upset about the estate. The allegations are false. I have documentation. I believe you, Nia, he said, but he didn't look like he believed me. You are a good employee. But we deal with sensitive client assets. We cannot have this kind of publicity attached to the firm. The optics are terrible. People are saying you stole jewelry from a dying woman. It is a lie, I insisted. It doesn't matter if it is a lie, he said gently. It matters that it is loud. We need you to take a leave of absence. Unpaid. Until this is resolved. Until your name is cleared. You are firing me, I asked. We are suspending you, he corrected. Go home, Nia. Fix this. Then come back. I walked out of the office carrying a box with my stapler and my framed degree. The walk to the car was the longest of my life. I felt the eyes of my colleagues burning into my back. I felt the weight of their judgment. Olivia had won. She had taken the one thing I had built for myself. She had taken my reputation. I drove back to the motel. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I locked the door and slid the chain into place. I collapsed onto the bed and let the tears come. Ugly, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. I was done. I was broken. They had money, they had influence, and now they had the court of public opinion. I was just one woman in a cheap motel room with a box of files. I grabbed my phone. I dialed the number for Elias Thorne. He picked up on the second ring. Thorne. I can't do this, I sobbed into the phone. I can't do it, Elias. They won. Nia, what happened? She posted a video, I choked out. She told everyone I stole Big Mama's jewelry. She told everyone I am blackmailing them. I just got suspended from my job. They are destroying me, Elias. Everyone thinks I am a monster. I should just sign the papers. I should just give them the house. I can't take this. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. I heard the scratch of a match, then the exhale of smoke. Are you finished? Elias asked. His voice was calm, devoid of the panic I felt. What are you finished crying? Because if you are done, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I wiped my nose with the back of my hand. I am listening. Good. Now I want you to pick up your phone. I want you to screenshot every single post, every comment, every lie. I want you to save that video before she deletes it. Why, I asked. Why do I want to look at it? Because Nia, she just handed us the keys to the kingdom, Elias said. His voice dropped, becoming a low growl. Do you know what the legal definition of malice is? Do you know what defamation of character looks like in a court of law? She is destroying my life, I screamed. She is destroying her own defense, Elias roared back. Listen to me. The no contest clause is triggered by an attack on the estate or the trustee, by publicly defaming you by accusing the trustee of theft without a shred of evidence. She has proven hostile intent. She has proven she is unfit to be a beneficiary. She isn't just fighting for the money anymore. She is proving that she is actively trying to harm the administration of the trust. He paused, his breathing heavy. And the jewelry? You said it is in the bank. Yes, I sniffled. Big Mama put it there years ago. Good. So we have proof she is lying. We have proof she is malicious, and we have proof she is using public pressure to coerce a trustee. Nia, this isn't a defeat. This is a gift. She got greedy. She got impatient. She wanted to hurt you so bad she forgot to protect herself. But I lost my job, I whispered. You will get it back, Elias said firmly, and you will get a hell of a lot more. When we walk into that courtroom, we aren't just going to show the judge the will. We are going to show him that video. We are going to show him the comments. We are going to show him exactly what kind of people they are. Judges hate liars, Nia, but they hate bullies even more. I sat up. I took a deep breath. The tears were drying on my face, leaving my skin tight and itchy. She is digging her own grave, Elias said. Stop trying to take the shovel out of her hand. Let her dig. I looked at the phone. I looked at the screenshot of Olivia's tear-streaked face. I saw the calculation in her eyes now. I saw the performance. You are right, I said. My voice was hoarse, but it was steady. I am always right, Elias said. Now dry your eyes, order some room service, and save every single receipts. We are going to bill the estate for your distress. We are going to make them pay for every tear. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel safe. But I felt something else. I felt dangerous. I opened my laptop. I started taking screenshots. I organized them into a folder labeled Evidence. I read the hateful comments, but this time they didn't hurt. They were just data. They were just bullets I was loading into my gun. Olivia wanted a villain. She wanted a thief. She wanted a war. Fine. I would give her a war. I would let her think she had won the battle. I would let her think I was cowering in the dark. But I wasn't cowering. I was waiting. And when the sun came up, I was going to be the one casting the shadow. The silence in the motel room was heavier than the humid air outside. For 2 days I had sat in the semi-darkness, the curtains drawn tight against the world, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My phone lay on the bedside table, turned off. I did not need to look at it to know what was happening. I could feel the vibrations of their desperation through the floorboards. Brad was running out of time. His bookies were not the kind of men who accepted IOUs or excuses. They wanted cash, and they wanted it yesterday. Olivia was bleeding money she did not have, trying to maintain the illusion of an empire, while the foundation rotted beneath her feet. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals always bite. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when the knock came. It was not the tentative tap of the maid service asking if I needed fresh towels. It was 3 hard, authoritative raps, the sound of someone who was paid to be persistent. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A man stood there. He was large, wearing a cheap windbreaker and holding a thick manila envelope. He looked bored. He looked like a man who ruined lives for $15 an hour. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. The humidity hit me first, followed by the smell of exhaust from the highway. Nia Washington, the man asked. He did not look me in the eye. He was already looking at his clipboard, checking a box. Yes, you have been served. He shoved the envelope into my chest. I grabbed it instinctively. Before I could say a word, he turned and walked away, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He got into a nondescript sedan and drove off, leaving me standing in the doorway of a cheap motel with the instrument of my destruction in my hands. I closed the door and locked it. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands were steady. My heart was beating a slow, rhythmic drum against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment Elias had predicted. This was the moment I had feared and craved in equal measure. I tore open the envelope. The document on top was stamped in red ink. Urgent. State Court of Probate. In re the estate of Ruby Washington. Emergency ex parte petition for temporary conservatorship and appointment of special administrator. I read the words and they burned into my retinas. They hadn't just filed for control of the estate. They had filed for control of me. I flipped to the affidavit signed by Olivia Sterling. Her signature was a flourish of loops and sharp angles, aggressive and pretentious. Petitioner alleges that the respondent Nia Washington has demonstrated a pattern of erratic and unstable behavior consistent with a severe mental health crisis. Respondent has been observed in a state of squalor, neglecting basic hygiene and self-care while squatting in the decedent's property. Squalor. I had kept that house spotless. I had scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees. I read on. Petitioner further alleges that the respondent has misappropriated assets belonging to the estate, specifically vintage jewelry valued at over $50,000. The respondent has been recorded making threats of extortion against the family. They were using the lie. They were using the video Olivia posted as evidence. They were submitting a fabrication to a court of law under penalty of perjury. But the real dagger was in the next paragraph. Due to the respondent's diminished capacity and flight risk, petitioner requests an immediate emergency order granting Bradley Sterling full executive power over the estate to secure assets and prevent further dissipation. Petitioner further requests that the court freeze all accounts associated with the respondent pending a competency hearing. They wanted to freeze me out. They wanted to starve me. They wanted to declare me incompetent so they could lock me away or discard me while they looted the vault. They were painting me as a madwoman and a thief, a danger to myself and the legacy of the woman I loved more than anything in the world. Brad had signed the second affidavit. I, Bradley Sterling, attest that I have personally witnessed Nia Washington in a state of delusion. She has refused access to the property and has made verbal threats to destroy the premises. Immediate intervention is required to preserve the value of the land for the beneficiaries. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They took my grief and called it madness. They took my defense of the home and called it destruction. They took my silence and called it guilt. I looked at the hearing date. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., emergency session. They didn't give me time to prepare. They didn't give me time to find a lawyer. They wanted to walk into that courtroom, ambush me, and walk out with a court order that handed them the keys to the kingdom. They were counting on me being too scared to show up. They were counting on me being broken. I set the papers down on the bed. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain a fraction of an inch. The sun was shining outside, bright and indifferent. Cars were rushing by on the highway, people going about their lives oblivious to the war being waged in room 114. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was the absolute zero of total clarity. They had done it. They had crossed the line. They had initiated legal action. They had challenged the natural order. They had tried to seize control before the will was read. They had triggered the trap. I picked up my phone and turned it on. It buzzed instantly, a flood of notifications I ignored. I dialed the only number that mattered. It rang once. Thorne. They filed, I said. Read it to me, Elias said. His voice was calm, the sound of grinding rocks. I read him the petition. I read him the accusations of theft and insanity. I read him the demand for emergency control. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the scratching of a pen on paper. They cited mental instability, Elias asked. Yes. And theft. Yes. And they are asking for immediate executorship, yes. Brad wants full control by noon tomorrow. Elias let out a low, dry chuckle. It sounded like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Greedy, he muttered. So greedy. They couldn't wait. They couldn't just wait for the reading. They had to grab the wheel. Is it enough? I asked. Is it enough to trigger the clause, Nia, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. It is more than enough. This is a declaration of war against the estate. By filing this petition, they have formally challenged the administration of the trust before they even knew it existed. They have accused the trustee of fraud. They have attempted to bypass the probate process. They have walked right into the kill zone. So what do? You get dressed, Elias said. You put on your best suit. You brush your hair, you walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning with your head held high. Do not bring a lawyer, do not bring a defense. What I gripped the phone tighter. You aren't coming, I will be there, Elias said. But not with you. I am the attorney for the trust. I represent Ruby Washington. You are the respondent. I want the judge to see you sitting there alone. I want Brad and Olivia to see you sitting there alone. I want them to think they have won. I want them to be so confident, so arrogant that they say things on the record that they can never take back. And then Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper, I will walk through those doors, and I will end them. I hung up the phone. I looked at the manila envelope on the bed. It wasn't a death sentence anymore. It was a suicide note, signed by Brad and Olivia Sterling. I went to the bathroom and turned on the shower. I scrubbed the motel smell off my skin. I washed my hair. I stood under the hot water until the tension in my muscles began to melt away. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the bait, and the trap was set. I stepped out of the shower and wiped the steam from the mirror. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were dark, but they weren't hollow. There was a fire in them now, a cold blue fire. I packed my bag. I put the ledgers in first, then the files I had compiled on Brad's debts. I put the petition on top. I folded my suit carefully and hung it on the back of the door. It was a charcoal gray suit, sharp and professional, the kind of suit a forensic accountant wore when she was about to dissect a fraud. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the sun go down. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I just watched the neon sign flicker, counting down the hours. The time for crying was over. The time for begging was over. My family had wanted a fight. They had wanted to crush me to get to the money. They didn't realize that the money was never the prize. The prize was the truth. And tomorrow in open court, everyone was going to hear it. I checked my watch. 12 hours. Tick-tock, Brad. Tick-tock. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a scent I had become familiar with over my years as a forensic accountant, usually while sitting behind a stack of evidence waiting to put a white-collar criminal in jail. But today, I was not the expert witness. I was the defendant. I was the problem. I sat alone at the defense table. The wood was cool and scarred under my fingertips. To my left, the plaintiff's table was crowded. Olivia sat in the center, a vision of tragic elegance in her black Chanel suit. She had added a black veil, a touch so melodramatic, it took every ounce of my self-control not to roll my eyes. Brad sat next to her, looking solemn and expensive in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He kept patting her hand, performing the role of the supportive husband for an audience of one, the Honorable Judge Miller. Behind them in the first row of the gallery sat my parents, Marcus and Beatrice. They were holding hands, their heads bowed as if in prayer. They would not look at me. They stared fixedly at the back of Olivia's head, their loyalty clearly drawn in the geography of the courtroom. They had chosen their side. They had chosen the winners, or so they thought. Olivia's lawyer stood up. His name was Sterling Archer, no relation to Brad, though they shared the same oily charm. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth. He wore a suit that shimmered slightly under the fluorescent lights and a watch that was heavy enough to anchor a small boat. Your Honor, Archer began, his voice a rich baritone that filled the room. We are here today under the most grievous of circumstances. My clients, Olivia and Bradley Sterling, come before this court, not out of greed, but out of desperate necessity. They come to protect the legacy of a beloved matriarch from the instability of a troubled young woman. He gestured toward me, without looking at me, as if I were a stain on the floor. The respondent. Nia Washington has demonstrated a pattern of erratic and dangerous behavior since the passing of Ruby Washington. We have submitted affidavits detailing her mental decline. We have submitted video evidence of her public outbursts. We have submitted sworn statements from her own parents attesting to her long history of instability. I watched my mother nod. It was a small movement, a slight dip of her chin, But it hit me like a physical blow. She was agreeing. She was sitting there listening to a stranger call her daughter crazy, and she was agreeing. Archer continued pacing in front of the bench. But the issue at hand is not just mental health. It is theft. We have credible reason to believe that the respondent has already begun dissipating the assets of the estate. Valuable jewelry is missing. Financial documents are unaccounted for. She has barricaded herself in the decedent's home, refusing access to the rightful heirs. She is holding the estate hostage, Your Honor. He paused for effect, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. We are asking for an emergency order, Archer said, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. We are asking for the immediate removal of Nia Washington as any potential administrator. We are asking for the immediate transfer of all estate assets, including the real property, and all liquid accounts to the control of Olivia Sterling. We cannot wait for probate. Every hour we wait is an hour this woman could be draining accounts and selling off heirlooms. We need to stop the bleeding. Judge Miller peered over his spectacles. He was an older man, with a face like a crumpled paper bag, and eyes that had seen every variation of human greed. He looked at Archer, then he looked at me. Ms. Washington, the judge said, his voice was dry. Where is your counsel? I stood up. My legs felt steady. My hands were not shaking. I had spent the morning in the mirror practicing this moment. I was wearing a navy blue suit I had bought with Elias's money. My hair was pulled back. I looked professional. I looked sane. He is on his way. Your Honor, I said. He was delayed. Delayed. Archer scoffed. Or perhaps he does not exist, Your Honor. This is another delay tactic. She is stalling. She knows she has no defense. She knows she has no standing. She is a squatter who has been living off her grandmother's charity for 5 years, and now she is trying to extend the free ride. The judge held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at me again. The allegations here are serious, Ms. Washington. Theft, extortion, mental instability. Your own family has signed affidavits against you. Do you have anything to say for yourself before I rule on this petition? I looked at the plaintiff's table. Olivia had lifted her veil. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked at me, and for a second the mask slipped. I saw the smirk. I saw the triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she had crushed me. I looked at Brad. He was checking his watch, probably calculating how long it would take to get to the bank once the gavel banged. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had already spent the money. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at his shoes. My mother was whispering something to Olivia, smoothing her hair. They were strangers to me. They were just people who had shared a house with me once. I turned back to the judge. I have a great deal to say. Your Honor, I said, but I would prefer to wait for my attorney. He has the relevant documentation. Archer slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Your Honor, this is a mockery. We have a crisis here. We have creditors calling. We have a property that is deteriorating. We need an executor appointed today. Right now. We are asking you to grant full control to Olivia Sterling so she can save her grandmother's legacy. The judge looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9 o'clock, Mr. Archer makes a compelling case, the judge said. If you have no representation, Ms. Washington, and no evidence to refute these affidavits, I am inclined to grant the emergency order. The court's primary concern is the preservation of the estate. He picked up his pen. He hovered over the order. I checked my watch. Wait, I said. The courtroom doors swung open with a heavy, groaning creak that sounded like the lid of a tomb being pried loose. Heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floor. A silence swept across the room, sudden and absolute. Archer turned around. Olivia turned around. Brad looked up from his watch. Walking down the center aisle was Elias Thorne. He did not look like the disheveled man I had met in the office. He was wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit that looked like it had been tailored in London. His wild white hair was tamed, combed back severely. He carried a leather briefcase that looked thick enough to stop a bullet. He did not walk like an old man. He walked like a tank. He walked like a man who owned the building and everyone in it. He walked past the gallery, ignoring my parents. He walked past the plaintiff's table, ignoring Archer's open mouth. He walked right up to the defense table and set his briefcase down next to me. He looked at the judge. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Elias Thorne for the defense," he rumbled. "And for the estate of Ruby Washington." The judge blinked. "Mr. Thorne." "You are cutting it close," Traffic Elias said dismissively. He looked at Archer. "I apologize. I missed the opening act." "Was it good?" "Did they cry?" Archer bristled. "Your Honor, I object." "Who is this man?" "We have no record of I am the man who is going to explain to you why your clients are about to be homeless," Elias said. He opened his briefcase. He pulled out a single thick envelope. It was sealed with red wax. He placed it on the defense table. He turned to me. He winked. Then he turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs have filed an emergency petition for executorship based on the assumption that Ruby Washington died intestate, or that her will is a simple document leaving everything to her next of kin. They have based their entire legal strategy and indeed their entire financial futures on the belief that this estate is up for grabs." He tapped the envelope. "They are mistaken." Archer laughed. It was a nervous sound. "We know there is a will. We expect to be beneficiaries. We are just asking for interim control to protect the assets from this Leech." He pointed at me. Elias did not look at him. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, 10 years ago, Ruby Washington sat in my office and drafted a document. It was not just a will, it was an irrevocable trust, a living trust. She transferred every asset she owned, every property, every stock, every shell company into that trust." The room went deadly silent. I saw Brad's face go pale. I saw Olivia freeze. "Irrevocable," Elias repeated, "meaning it could not be changed, meaning the assets were not hers when she died. They belonged to the trust, and the trust has a sole beneficiary." He pointed at me. "Nia Washington." My mother gasped. It was a loud, wet sound. My father grabbed her arm. "That is a lie!" Olivia screamed, standing up. She was senile. She didn't know what she was doing. "Nia manipulated her." Elias turned to her. His eyes were cold. "Sit down, Mrs. Sterling," he said. "You are not going to want to be standing for what comes next." He picked up the envelope and handed it to the bailiff. "Hand this to the judge, please." The bailiff took the envelope and walked it up to the bench. The judge took it. He broke the wax seal. He pulled out the document. "We challenge this," Archer shouted. "We challenge the validity of this trust. We challenge the competency of the grantor. This is fraud." Elias smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "I was hoping you would say that," he said softly. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, if you would be so kind as to turn to page 42. Section 7, paragraph 3. The judge flipped the pages. The sound was loud in the silent room. He found the page. He adjusted his glasses. He read it silently for a moment. His eyebrows shot up. He looked at Archer. He looked at Olivia and Brad. Then he looked at me. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Archer," the judge said, his voice grave. "Did you advise your clients regarding the existence of a no-contest clause?" Archer frowned. We haven't seen the document, but a no-contest clause usually just means they lose their inheritance if they sue. We are prepared to take that risk to prove fraud." The judge shook his head. "This is not a standard clause, Mr. Archer." He looked down at the paper and began to read aloud. "In the event that any natural heir or family member initiates legal action to challenge the validity of this trust, or seeks to remove the appointed trustee, or petitions the court for emergency control of the estate's assets prior to the formal reading of the will." The judge paused. He looked at the petition Archer had just filed. The petition demanding emergency control. "They shall be immediately and permanently disinherited. Olivia let out a sob. But that is not all, the judge continued. Furthermore, any loans, debts, or housing privileges extended to said individuals by any entity owned by the trust shall be immediately called due in full. Any property occupied by said individuals owned by the trust shall be vacated within 24 hours. The judge looked up. Mr. Sterling, he said, looking at Brad. It says here that your brokerage firm was funded by a loan from Emerald City Holdings. Brad swallowed hard. Yes. That was Ruby's company. It is the trust's company, the judge corrected. And this clause says the loan is now due, in full, today. He looked at Olivia. Mrs. Sterling, it says here your residence in the suburbs is titled to Obsidian Properties. Olivia nodded dumbly. That is also the trust, the judge said. You are evicted. He looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Washington, your vehicle leases. Sapphire, LLC. He closed the document. By filing this petition, by standing here today and demanding control, you have triggered the nuclear option. You haven't just lost your inheritance. You have lost everything you currently possess. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb going off that split second before the shockwave hits. Olivia made a sound like a wounded animal. She collapsed into her chair. Brad stared at the wall, his mouth opening and closing. My parents looked like statues. Elias turned to me. He picked up his briefcase. The gatekeeper has spoken, he whispered. I stood up. I looked at my family. They weren't powerful anymore. They weren't scary. They were just broke people in expensive clothes. I checked my watch. It is 9:15, I said. I looked at Brad. You have 24 hours to get your trash out of my grandmother's house. I turned and walked toward the doors. Elias followed me. Behind us, the screaming started. The air in the courtroom was stagnant, heavy with the scent of impending doom. Judge Miller raised his gavel, the wood hovering in the air like a guillotine blade ready to drop. I gripped the edge of the defense table, my knuckles white. Archer was smirking. Olivia was dabbing her eyes with that lace handkerchief, already rehearsing her victory speech. Brad was checking his watch, mentally spending money he didn't have yet. My parents were staring at the floor, unable to witness the execution they had authorized. The gavel began its descent. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the room groaned open. The sound was loud, irreverent, shattering the silence. The judge paused, his hand suspended in midair. He looked up, annoyed. Elias Thorne stepped into the room. He did not look like the disheveled man in the office. He looked like a storm front moving in. He walked down the center aisle with a heavy, rhythmic gait, ignoring the bailiff who started to rise. He carried nothing but a thick, red, welded envelope. He walked past the gallery. He walked past my parents. He walked past the plaintiff's table. He stopped at the defense table, placed the envelope on the mahogany surface with a heavy thud, and looked up at the bench. Apologies for the delay, Your Honor. Elias rumbled, his voice gravel and steel. Traffic on the bridge, but I believe you will want to read this before you sign that order. Archer jumped up. Objection. Who is this man? This is an ex parte hearing. The time for submission has passed. I am the attorney for the estate of Ruby Washington, Elias said, not even looking at him. And the time for submission passed 10 years ago. The judge lowered his gavel slowly. He gestured for the bailiff to retrieve the envelope. Mr. Thorne, you represent the decedent. I represent the trust, Elias corrected. The Ruby Washington Irrevocable Trust. Olivia made a noise in the back of her throat, a sharp intake of breath. The judge opened the envelope. He pulled out the document. He scanned the first page. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Mr. Archer, the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet. Did your clients inform you that the decedent died without assets? That is absurd, Archer scoffed. She owned prime real estate. She had accounts. She owned nothing, Elias said. She transferred every asset, every property, and every liquid account into the trust a decade ago. The estate is empty. The trust owns it all. And the trust has a sole beneficiary. He turned to me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Nia Washington. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Olivia stood up. Her face was twisted, the mask of grief gone, replaced by pure, ugly rage. "That is a lie," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "She was senile. She didn't know what she was doing. You manipulated her. We will sue. We will petition to have this trust annulled immediately." Elias turned to her. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling," he said softly. "I was waiting for you to say that." He looked back at the judge. "Your Honor, if you would please turn to page 42, the no contest clause." The judge flipped the pages. He found the section. He began to read, his lips moving silently at first, then he looked up, his eyes wide. "It states here," the judge read aloud, "that any beneficiary who initiates legal action against the appointed trustee or challenges the validity of the trust assets or seeks to alter the distribution shall forfeit all interest in the estate." "But that is not all," Elias said. "Read the next paragraph, the part about the shell companies." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Furthermore, any individual who contests this trust shall immediately forfeit any housing privileges, loans, or stipends provided by entities owned by the trust. All debts shall be called due immediately. All property usage shall be revoked." Elias turned to face the family. "Brad," he said, "your brokerage firm. It operates out of a building owned by Obsidian Properties. That is a trust asset. Your business loan funded by Sapphire Holdings. Trust asset." He looked at Olivia. "Your house in the suburbs. The mortgage is held by Emerald City LLC. Trust asset." He looked at my parents. "Your retirement stipend, your car leases, all paid by the trust." Elias checked his watch. "Because you just stood up in open court and threatened to sue an act of contest recorded on the stenographer's tape, the clause is triggered. You are in default. The loans are called. The leases are canceled. You are evicted." He leaned in close to Brad, whose face had gone the color of ash. "You don't just lose the inheritance, son. You lose the shirt off your back. The trust owns the clothes you are wearing, and I want them back." The judge slammed the gavel down. "Petition denied. The trust stands. Mr. Archer, control your clients before I have them removed." But it was too late. The trap had snapped shut. They hadn't just lost a fortune they never earned. They had lost the very ground they were standing on. The heavy doors of the courthouse swung shut behind us, but the nightmare for the Sterling family was just beginning. We walked into the bright, harsh sunlight of the parking lot. Brad immediately stopped dead in his tracks. A massive flatbed tow truck was backed up against his pristine black Mercedes G-Wagon. A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit was already hooking the chains to the undercarriage. Brad sprinted forward, screaming at the top of his lungs. He yelled that it was his car and threatened to sue the driver for every dime he had. The driver did not even look up. He just pointed a thick thumb over his shoulder at Elias, who was standing by the curb holding a clipboard. Elias told him calmly that the vehicle was leased by Sapphire Holdings, and since the lessee was in verified default, the asset was being repossessed immediately. Brad turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. The veins in his neck bulged as he realized his power was gone. He spun around to face Olivia, who was standing frozen on the sidewalk, shivering in the heat. He marched up to her and got right in her face, ignoring the people staring at them. "You told me this was a lock," he shouted, spraying spit. "You told me the old woman was senile and the sister was stupid. You dragged me into this pit." Olivia tried to reach for him, sobbing that they could fix it, but he slapped her hand away violently. "You are useless," Brad spat the word like poison. "You are a broke, useless anchor, and I am cutting the line. I am done with you and your pathetic family." He turned his back on her and walked toward the street, hailing a taxi without looking back once. Olivia stood there alone, watching the cab driving away with her husband inside, while the tow truck dragged the symbol of their fake wealth in the opposite direction. She looked small and broken in her expensive mourning clothes. My parents watched the scene unfold with absolute horror. They looked at the empty space where the Mercedes had been. They looked at Olivia sobbing on the curb. Then they looked at me standing next to Elias. I saw the calculation happen behind their eyes. They realized the ship was sinking and they needed a life raft immediately. They ran over to me. My mother reached out to grab my hands, tears streaming down her face that looked far more real than the ones she had shed in the courtroom. "Naya, baby, please listen to us," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "We did not know. Brad tricked us. He manipulated everyone. We were just scared, Nia. We thought we were doing what was best for the family." My father nodded vigorously, adding that Brad had confused them with legal jargon and they never wanted to hurt me. He claimed they were just trying to protect the estate and they had been misled by Brad's lies. I pulled my hands away from my mother as if she had burned me. I looked at them, and for the first time in my life I did not see my parents. I saw two strangers who had sold me out for a condo with a view. I stepped closer to them so I did not have to shout. "You just stood in front of a judge and swore under oath that I was a thief," I said, my voice ice cold. "You committed perjury to destroy me just to keep your lifestyle. You called me a leech. You watched them spit on Big Mama's garden. Do not call me your daughter. I am not your daughter right now. I am the sole trustee of the entity that owns the roof over your heads. I am your creditor, and I am collecting on the debt." The fall of the House of Sterling was not a slow decline, but a cliff dive. The machinery of the trust moved with ruthless efficiency. Within 48 hours of the court ruling, the eviction notices were served. I did not have to lift a finger. Elias handled everything. Obsidian Properties reclaimed the suburban McMansion where Olivia had held court. Sapphire Holdings took back the luxury condo in the Heights. My parents, who had spent a lifetime turning up their noses at anything less than perfection, were forced to pack their lives into cardboard boxes. They moved into a cramped, two-bedroom walk-up in a neighborhood they used to make jokes about at dinner parties. The country club memberships were revoked. The Fairweather friends stopped calling the moment the address changed. They were left with nothing but each other and the bitter taste of their own hubris. Brad did not even make it out of the state. I handed the files I had compiled to the district attorney. My forensic accounting finally served its ultimate purpose. I traced the loans from Emerald City Holdings and proved that Brad hadn't just defaulted. He had committed wire fraud. He had falsified assets to secure the loans and then embezzled the funds to pay off his gambling debts. He thought he was stealing from a faceless corporation, never realizing he was stealing from his wife's grandmother. The police picked him up at a motel near the airport. He traded his Italian suits for a county orange jumpsuit, facing 10 to 15 years for fraud and embezzlement. The titan of real estate was now just inmate number 4829. 6 months later, I stopped at a grocery store on the edge of town. It was not the high-end organic market my mother had adored, but a regular chain store with flickering fluorescent lights and scuffed linoleum floors. I was buying a bouquet of white lilies for Big Mama's grave. I placed the flowers on the conveyor belt and waited. The cashier kept her head down, scanning the items with mechanical exhaustion. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, the expensive highlights grown out and dull. Her hands, once manicured to perfection, were rough and dry. She muttered the total without looking up. $20.50. I reached into my purse and pulled out a bill. I held it out. She looked up to take it. Her eyes met mine. It was Olivia. The Chanel was gone, replaced by a stained polyester vest, with a name tag that hung crookedly on her chest. The arrogance that had defined her existence was extinguished, replaced by a dull, aching shame that seemed to pull her shoulders down. She froze, her hand hovering in the air, trembling slightly. She stared at me, waiting. She waited for the mockery. She waited for me to laugh, to sneer, to do exactly what she would have done in my position. She braced herself for the cruelty she had taught me to expect. But I did not speak. I did not smile. I just looked at her. I looked at the sister who had tried to erase me, the woman who had stood in a courtroom and called me a thief, and I felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was only a vast, quiet indifference. I placed the money in her hand. She took it, her fingers brushing mine. Her skin was cold. She processed the transaction, the register beeping loudly in the silence between us. She handed me the receipt. Her mouth opened slightly as if she wanted to say something, perhaps to apologize or to beg, but no words came out. I picked up the lilies. I turned away from the register. I walked out through the automatic doors into the bright afternoon sun without looking back. I did not need to say a word. My silence was the loudest sound in her world. I got into my car and drove toward the cemetery. I had a promise to keep to Big Mama, and I had a life to live. 3 years have passed since the gavel fell in that courtroom. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy a private island. I did not spend my days drinking champagne on a beach while the world burned. I took the fortune that the trust preserved, and I poured it into concrete and glass and justice. I opened the doors to the Ruby Initiative in the heart of the financial district. It is a forensic accounting firm with a very specific mission. We serve women who are being financially erased. We serve wives whose husbands claim the business is bankrupt while hiding millions in offshore accounts. We serve daughters who are being cut out of their birthright. I sit across from clients who look exactly the way I looked in that motel room. They are terrified. They are exhausted. They have been told they are crazy. They have been told they are worthless. And then I slide a file across the desk. I show them the hidden ledgers. I show them the shell companies. I show them the truth. I watch the fear leave their eyes and I watch the steel enter their spines. Every time I help a woman reclaim her life, I feel Big Mama's hand on my shoulder. That is the real inheritance. It is not the money. It is the agency. It is the power to stand in a room full of men who think they own the world and tell them that the bill has come due. Now I sit here in the quiet of my penthouse living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows frame the city skyline like a painting of electric jewels. The velvet of the armchair is soft against my skin. I am wearing silk not because I need to impress anyone, but because I like how it feels. I pick up the silver frame from the side table. It is the only thing I took from the house that day, besides the ledgers. It is a photo of Ruby Washington standing in front of her hydrangeas, wearing a straw hat and laughing at a joke only she understood. I raise my glass of wine to her. The family calls me a leech. The internet called me a gold digger. But the women I save call me a lifeline. My parents and my sister are out there somewhere, living the small, bitter lives they earned. They are trapped in the prison of their own greed, looking through the bars at a world they can no longer touch. But I am here. I am not lonely. I am not broken. I have the work. I have the legacy. And I have the one thing they never understood the value of. I have my freedom. The best revenge is not burning their house down. It is building a castle they are not allowed to enter. It is living a life so vibrant and so full that their absence is not a hole, but a relief. I check my watch. It is 9 o'clock. The city is awake and I have work to do. I take a sip of wine and I smile. The game is over, and I won. This story powerfully reminds us that our worth is never defined by those who fail to see it, even if they are family. True power lies not in loud arrogance or material displays, but in integrity, resilience, and the quiet confidence of knowing who you are. While betrayal cuts deep, it often clears the path for us to build a life based on authentic connections rather than obligation. The ultimate victory isn't destruction. It is the freedom to thrive on your own terms, proving that living well and helping others is the most profound form of justice. If this story of resilience and justice resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.